So unless you've been living under a rock, you might have heard that the Switch 2 finally got revealed, and along with that we got a glimpse of a brand new Mario Kart, which has inspired me to make a follow-up to my Forgotten Mario Kart Courses video, and it definitely was not at all influenced by that video being the most popular on my channel by a country mile. Anyway, the most logical follow-up to Forgotten Courses would be to go over the Forgotten Races, or in other terms, the characters that showed up for one game and then never came back for another go around the track. And it turns out by sheer coincidence, that's also pretty much just a list of every character from a previous entry that's not in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Last thing before we get into this, I just want to quickly go over the two ground rules I have. One, this list does not include any characters that have only appeared in 8 Deluxe, since we don't know what the final roster for the Switch 2 Mario Kart is right now. But if you're curious, the only additional characters to talk about would have been the Inklings, along with Link, Villager, and Isabelle if you consider the original and Deluxe versions of 8 to be the same game. And 2, I will not be counting alternate costumes as separate characters. This is basically just here so I'm not listing out the 20 odd versions of Mario that are only in Tour. The general rule being that if there's no in-universe evidence to suggest that it is in fact a different person, it doesn't count for this video. Though I will take an aside to mention the one potential toss-up in this rule with the Doctor versions of Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Bowser. As whilst I personally just see them as the regular cast in lab coats, some people will insist these are separate characters. So I'll give them a passing mention here to avoid any potential conniption fits. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. Let's begin things by looking at the characters that, as of right now, are currently stuck in mobile game hell. Now, not counting alternate skins for pre-existing characters, there's currently 8 races that, as of now, have only appeared in Tour. And for some level of structure, let's go in order of how close they've been to showing up in other games. First up, there's the 3 that have flat out never appeared in another entry in any capacity, with Dixie Kong, Captain Toad, and Chargin' Chuck. I couldn't really tell you why Dixie has been passed over. Maybe she was considered too heavily tied to the Donkey Kong series, whilst lacking the overwhelming perfection of a character like Funky Kong. Captain Toad is probably a case of being more fitting as an alternate costume, with Toad himself not really being popular enough to warrant alternate skins being given separate slots on the roster, like with Mario, Peach, or Bowser. And then Chargin' Chuck, whilst a neat inclusion, isn't quite popular enough to make the cut like other Mario enemies such as Koopa and Shy Guy. In a similar league to those 3 is Nabbit, the one somewhat memorable thing to come from New Super Mario Bros. U, other than that one painting level and the Super Crown. Whilst he's not appeared in person in another game, his logo does appear on one of the Racer Soda ads featured in a handful of courses from 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, specifically appearing on the grape flavor. In my opinion, his return is mainly dependent on if Nintendo feel anything that could be done or represented by his inclusion isn't or wasn't already done by Peachette. Then we have 3 more characters that have all had small appearances within the main games, despite not being racers outside of Tour, with Monty Mole, who's been a series recurring hazard since the original Super Mario Kart, King Bob-omb, who in addition to his role as a boss in DS's Mission Mode, also has a background cameo on the Bowser's Factory track from arcade GPDX, and Poochie, who shows up in the background of the Yoshi's Island course from the Booster Course Pass. Whilst I'm not necessarily opposed to these guys being brought back, I do feel they work better as background elements or stage hazards than races. I can't really articulate why, they just feel off to me as races. Especially Poochie, like, we were already pushing things by letting babies race. How the hell is the dog driving? Finally, we have the racer who has come the closest to having been in multiple games, with the weird part being that Tor would have been the character's second appearance, with the racer in question being Hammer Bro. For those unaware, in addition to the enemy's frequent appearances as a background character in a handful of tracks, based on files found within the game, Hammer Bro was almost a playable character in Mario Kart Wii, alongside PD Piranha, a third Mii costume based on Toad, and someone else who we'll be talking about later. Overall, I think Hammer Bro is probably the most likely one to make a return, even if he feels like a bit of a safe pick. But maybe they could also throw in his alternate forms like Boomerang and Fire Bro as alternate skins. Before we move on to the next category, I just want to quickly go over a small outlier that I couldn't really figure out a way to talk about otherwise. Now, if you saw the previous video I did on Forgotten Courses, you'd know it ended with a small highlight reel of the tracks that returned in Tour, but otherwise have remained absent from the series. And whilst I was planning to do the same thing for this video, it turns out there's only one racer that fits under that description, that being Donkey Kong Jr., who after disappearing following his debut in the original Super Mario Kart, was brought back for Tour as part of events to celebrate Mario's 35th anniversary. Now, since DK Jr. has effectively been replaced by Diddy Kong in practically all Mario and Donkey Kong media since the late 90s and 2000s, unless they go the full mile like Tour did and have him still be a 2D sprite as a deliberate callback to the first Mario Kart, I don't think we're going to be seeing him again anytime soon, since he doesn't really have anything going for him other than nostalgia. Now that we've gone through phone purgatory, let's get to the actual forgotten characters who have had chances to come back, but for whatever reason never touched the track again. Alright, to be completely transparent, there weren't really enough abandoned characters in the regular games alone to warrant a full video, so I've had to pull a desperation move by acknowledging the fact that the arcade Mario Kart games do in fact exist. Now, thanks to these games being developed by Bandai Namco, they actually feature a handful of guest racers, though the only recurring ones are the characters pulled from Pac-Man, with the titular Pellet Muncher appearing in all of them, except for the VR one, along with both Miss Pac-Man and Blinky showing up for the first two. In addition to them, there are two other guest racers that only appeared in one game each, with GP2 featuring Mamechi, a character from Bandai's line of virtual pets called Tamagotchi, whilst GP included Don-chan, the main character of the rhythm game series Taiko no Tatsujin. If you're wondering why these guys were included, Don-chan's makes a fair amount of sense, since on top of the series being pretty popular in Japanese arcades, Taiko and Mario had done collabs before, with some Mario songs appearing in certain entries, along with the Donkey Konga series effectively being a Donkey Kong reskin of Taiko. As for Mamechi, I think their reasoning goes as far as Tamagotchi being really popular, along with GP2 coming out around the time of Bandai's merger with Namco. The two series had crossed over before, namely with a Japan-exclusive Tamagotchi party game for the N64, which featured pets based on Mario and Wario. As for these guys' chances of actually being included in a mainline entry, that entirely comes down to whether or not Nintendo is interested in including third-party racers. And given that Pac-Man could only get a Mii costume that's locked behind an amiibo, I'm very doubtful we will ever see Mamechi or Don-chan in another one of these, especially since not only did the most recent entry in the arcade series, GPVR, completely remove all guest characters, but that game came out in 2017, and there hasn't been any hints of a new one since. So for all we know, this subseries of Mario Kart might be dead, only living through the odd machine in the wild and emulation ROMs, which unfortunately leaves these guys with the worst odds of coming back. But who knows, if we had to wait 11 years for a proper new mainline Mario Kart, maybe we'll get a new arcade GP by 2028. I don't like how that sounds closer than it should. To end things off, we have the 3 characters that are truly forgotten, all of them having made appearances in a mainline Mario Kart only to be banished from entering a vehicle ever again. And to build up that feeling of abandonment, let's cover these guys in reverse release order. Starting off, we have a Mario Kart 7 with Honey Queen, aka that giant bean lady from 2 missions in Super Mario Galaxy and 1 mission in Galaxy 2. I think from that description, you can immediately see one of the major problems people had with her. That being, she's just a really weird choice, which is not necessarily a bad thing on its own, but it ended up resulting with her being viewed as stealing a slot from more popular characters like Waluigi and Diddy Kong, showcasing that Smash Bros. Is not the only Nintendo franchise that suffers from people whining about their favourite character not being in it. Compound that with the fact that her potential job of representing the Galaxy games was already done by Rosalina, who is an unfathomably more popular character, with her only appearances since 7 being a spirit in Smash Ultimate and an assistant in the defunct Dr. Mario mobile game, and Honey Queen is left as a character who lacks the relevance to have a proper fanbase, whilst not really having anything to offer other than being a somewhat cute callback to the Galaxy games, making her a novelty at best. After that, we have the series' first ever guest character within the main games, with Mario Kart DS's Rob. Now, whilst Rob seems like a strange pick for the first non-Mario character to be in one of these games, ignoring Pac-Man in Arcade GP, it was even stranger back then, because Mario Kart DS marks the first time Rob was ever made a playable character in anything, coming a whole 3 years before his debut as a fighter in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. His only in-game appearances beforehand being small cameos in titles such as Kirby's Dream Land 3, Pikmin 2, and F-Zero GX. Now, whilst this likely was just supposed to be a cute reference to the NES, with guests likely just being viewed as a one-off thing for the DS initially, given the series would eventually go more in depth with these crossover elements, with both 8's DLC and 8 Deluxe, it funnily enough makes a situation where, to jump ahead a bit, I actually think Rob probably has the best chances out of these 3 to come back, especially since people who didn't grow up with an NES will likely still recognize him as the robot from Smash. The only things really holding him back being the potential of other guests being picked over him, as well as not wanting to include too many guests to avoid turning Mario Kart into Nintendo Kart. For the last member of the Forgotten Trio, we have to go to Mario Kart Double Dash, for a racer that's been out of the game for over 2 decades by this point, with Paratrooper, and thankfully their explanation is the most simple and blatant of the 3. That being the only reason he was even added in the first place was because they needed a partner character for Koopa, and the easiest method of doing so was to just take the model they already made, colour it red, and add wings. The moment Double Dash's gimmick was removed, so was Paratrooper's reason for existing, as they're not really distinctive enough on their own to warrant adding them as a separate racer to Koopa, especially when, if you want to add a second Koopa character, you can just use Drybones instead, who actually stands out and is cooler because he's a skeleton. Sorry if that sounds childish, but being a skeleton is objectively more interesting than just being the same guy with wings, which is likely why he ended up being that other character who got cut from Wii that I mentioned earlier. Like, seriously, for a second, how lame of a reskin do you have to be that even the gacha mobile game turns you down? So unfortunately, Paratrooper commits the ultimate sin of just being a really boring and redundant pick that fails to distinguish themselves from the competition, leaving them in a situation where the only people that I could see actively wanting them back are the hardcore Double Dash fans and those who want them in the new game just for the sake of having them be there. And that is all of the Forgotten Mario Kart races. I am a bit curious to know how people feel about this group, and if there's any in particular you'd want to see in the new one. Personally, my top 3 are Rob, Hammerbro, and Charging Chuck. I don't know if I'll be returning to Mario Kart again anytime soon, unless I start making ranking videos or something, but just in case this blows up like the last one, I release new videos every 2 weeks, usually about random topics that interest me, though I do also have 2 long-running speedrunning series, one where I explain the origin of everything in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and another where I run through and explain the plot of Yakuza games to two of my friends who have never played a Yakuza game before. So if you like this video, maybe consider checking those out, and if you wish to directly support me, you can get a channel membership, with all members getting added to a thank you message at the end of videos, along with second and third tier members getting to watch new videos early. Thank you for listening to my rambling, and thanks for watching.